Okay. Let's start this thing again. Okay, the Boeing team. Let's get going. Thank you for the reminder.
All right, so this is the Boeing analysis. If you can click the next slide for me.
Sure. This is Zach talking?
No, this is Cornell, right?
Okay, you've got to identify yourself every time.
Yes, sir.
Because I deal with so many students. I'm sorry I can't remember.
Yes, sir. All right, so this is pretty much how everything got started. I'm gonna just give you guys a little taste of the background and pretty much who got everything started with this company. If you can click the next slide for me.
Sure.
All right, so to offer you guys a little information, this company was founded on July 15th, 1916 in Seattle, Washington by that man in the picture that you see right there. His name is William Boeing. And actually, the first Boeing airplane to ever take flight was named the Boeing 80. And this was just pretty much a small 12-passenger plane. And the company's headquarters was in Seattle until 2001 when they relocated to Chicago. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a little historic development. This company actually never started poor. This was always a company that was on top because pretty much William Boeing, he actually was already a wealthy man because from lumber companies that he had previously owned, and he didn't really get into into pretty much aviation until he was viewing one that took flight at Alaskan Yukon place. And another interesting thing about Boeing was actually their first headquarters wasn't actually what you probably thought it was. It was actually an old wood boat plant that he bought out, and he just kind of turned it into his own thing. And actually, Boeing didn't always have his name. They were originally called the Aerospace Company, and pretty much they didn't get that until 1917. And their first official income came from the United States military, where they built airplanes for patrol bombers and pretty much commercial airlines. Next.
Okay, this is Zach talking now. This is Abel's model for the company. Basically, it's just a framework that that talks about the customer groups, who the company is going to serve, and the customer needs, and along with the technology, how they're going to meet those needs of the consumer. So next slide, please. So customers' needs. Boeing's main segment.
Whoa, whoa. We don't begin with the customer's needs. Abel's model begins with the market, with the customers themselves. Oh, you don't have that.
I do. I didn't change the title. It's the content's there, but
Oh, okay. So these are the customers. Okay.
yeah, yes.
All right.
Yeah, I'm sorry about
Okay.
that.
All right. So we're working on now what these people need. Is that right?
Those are the needs of the people there. Yes. So aviation companies all over the world need safe and reliable aircraft. That is, that's definitely number one. They also, because of the conditions with global warming and recent news about fossil fuel usage, and environmental problems all over the world, planes need to be more fuel efficient than they have been, and planes also need to be affordable for different companies. Of course, we all know that inflation is through the roof right now, and it's up to Boeing to really innovate and continue to innovate its products so that it can be affordable for plane companies. And again, this section, here, let me move this so I can see. And the way we're going to do this to make it affordable for everybody is, continue to innovate and create different types of aircraft. According to the executive vice president of Boeing, Mr. Tom, is that?
Schick.
Yeah. He said we must increase value from existing programs and create new value for the company. So basically, that was a program that was initiated that talks about having older planes or planes that have already been sold being maintenance by Boeing.
Do you
And
really
it-
think these are the distinctive competences? That is and Boeing, in the course, you should have learned that distinctive competences are functional capabilities. I don't see any on this slide. What kind of skills and competences do you think are required to build advanced aircraft?
Really just a very standardized processes.
How
Affordable.
about aerospace engineering?
Yeah.
How about fuel?
Very-
How about fuel efficiency?
Right.
How about
Very
carbon
good.
composites to make these airplanes lighter, like you were talking about?
Right.
Yeah. And we could go on and on. I think one of the distinctive competences, frankly, is government relations. And
I talk about that later in the presentation.
well, but
government
this is a
relations.
distinctive competence that we need right here. Okay, what are the competences that a company needs to meet these needs? And frankly, these needs are not real specific, okay? What particular kind of needs does an airline require, or what kind of needs for commercial aircraft does an airline need? What kind of needs does the military have, and so forth? So I think you've taken sort of the easy way out here, and you might give some consideration to seeing if you can provide a little more specifics in this slide, and then how do we meet those needs here? By way of example, I don't see anything in this slide about range or how far the airplane can go, or the military superiority. Do you know that this morning the general in charge of the new Space Command of the Air Force admitted that China and Russia now have superior air capabilities to the United States? Have you seen that? Have you looked at the news? And the U.S. has got a major challenge in defense as well as commercial aircraft. So what is it that the U.S. needs? What needs have to be solved for Boeing to help its customers, whether they're airlines or the military, solve their problems? And of course, I see nothing in here about space with regard to satellites and the like. So maybe you could give a little further thought to exactly what the needs are. And here, I see no distinctive competences at all. So you want to give this slide a little more thought, okay?
Okay.
All right.
All right, so it's me, Cornell again. All right, so now I'm gonna talk to you about a little bit of the products and services that Boeing has to offer. So pretty much, if you can see here, there is a list of passenger / commercial aircrafts, and I'm just tell you a little information about each of these. So first up, we have the next generation 737. There are actually 7,084 of these planes built. There are 215 seats on each, and this plane is roughly around 76 million to $109 million to be built. And this plane was actually introduced in 1997. Next, we have the 737 MAX, and this is a plane that's probably famously known for the wrong reason. It's very poor design. Pretty much the engine is just too big for it to handle, and we'll be offering you information on that one further down. Next, we have the 747-8, and there's 144 of these. Pretty much costs $418 million to be built, and there's 410 seats. Next up is the 767. There are 1,232 of these built. Cost roughly around $200 million, and that was introduced in 1982. And next up, we have the 777, which is commonly known as the 777, introduced in 1995, and there are actually 1,000 of these built. Now we get into kind of the newer things, the 777X, which is kind of like the 777's younger brother. This one is actually a work in progress. It's not ready to be introduced until 2024. It's pretty much in just a testing range right now, and there are only currently 4 of these. And lastly, we have the 787, and there are only 1,000 of those, and it was introduced in 2007. Next slide, please. All right, so now this is where the millionaires, this is kind of where all your big money people, this is where they fly Boeing at. These are pretty much Boeing business jets, and these planes have a list price of $300 million. Pretty much, this is kind of just, if you don't pretty much like people and you're just kind of like a rich snobby guy, you want to fly private, you don't want to be around nobody. This is where you will pretty much fly, but actually, you can actually look at one of the cockpits right there. This is kind of not your ordinary plane, and you can kind of see why one of these planes costs $16,600. That's an hour for you to rent one of these. All right, next slide, please, Professor. All right, so Boeing is actually not just an aerospace company. They actually offer military assistance. Okay, so first up we have here the autonomous systems. This pretty much, they develop and produce pretty much remotely piloted aircrafts, which kind of is just kind of anonymous, pretty much like drones and stuff. Next, you have your commercial aircrafts, and this is pretty much where soldiers, they fly to and from their destinations. Missiles and weapon systems, that pretty much speaks for itself. Phantom Works, this is actually, it kind of has a wacky name, but this is kind of just like where they test things like blueprints, kind of where all the testing goes on in the background. And then you have space and launch, which one of my partners will give you more into depth about that. So this is kind of where they test kind of like rockets and stuff to see how far they go with NASA. Next, we have strike and surveillance, which pretty much is just military surveillance for aircrafts and vertical lifts. So actually, what I kind of found weird, I didn't know that actually Boeing makes helicopters also, which I didn't know. They're called rotorcrafts, and that's kind of just like, it's not a helicopter that's used for long distance. So just say, for instance, it's kind of give you, I guess if you don't want to drive, you can kind of just take that little helicopter, go down the street, and you can just come on right back. And a fun fact about Boeing is that it is the world's largest aerospace company and leading manufacturer of all commercial jetliners, defense, space, and security systems, and service provider of aftermarket support. All right, so this is kind of that little paragraph over there will just give you a gist about what Boeing International actually is. And pretty much it's just how they work overseas. And I'll actually be talking about this in a few more slides. And actually Boeing has, they work international in Australia, China, Europe, India, and in Israel. Next slide, please. And this is just pretty much a graph of the multinational corporation, but pay attention to the right side. And I'll actually tell you actually where most, which I kind of found that was kind of funny, where most of their profits come from, because I thought it was from the United States. But if you kind of look, actually most, like I said, 70% of all of their funds come from overseas. Next slide, please.
All right, so this is Eduardo now. And I'm going to be,
Okay.
and I'm going to be covering the environmental trends and issues. Next slide, please. So to begin with, we're going to look at the drivers of demand for the products and services of Boeing. All right, so Boeing is in a truly unique situation where they're not just in one industry. So they're in commercial jetliners, they're in the military, and they're in spacecraft. So the drivers of demand are unique to them because they're in multiple industries, you could say. So for example, we'll start with the commercial jets. So Boeing does not, they have to serve two types of customers. Yes, they have to sell aircraft to airliners, but at the same time, they're really also selling to the people who are going to fly in these planes. So they have to satisfy the needs of not only the airlines, but also the passengers of those airlines. Even though they're not selling directly to the passengers, it's important that they're also satisfied. So what a lot of people are looking for in new planes, both airliners and passengers, is larger engines that lead to more fuel efficient and faster planes with larger ranges, and reasonable pricing as far as not outrageously expensive planes or nothing like that. And if the planes aren't as expensive and the engines are more fuel efficient, that means that the prices are passed down to the people who attend these flights. So the customers are saving money as well. So it's also reasonable for them. And of course, your passengers are going to want comfortable planes, and safety is obviously extremely important. Boeing has been known for a long time, up until recently, for having some of the safest aircraft in the world, and easy maintenance and reliability. So I know a lot about aircraft. It's a personal interest of me, and I can tell you about 90% of all crashes are caused because of maintenance. So there's always some issue with maintenance that went wrong. Somebody forgot to attach a bolt or something like that. So keeping maintenance simple and standardized across all your aircraft is extremely important. All right, next slide, please.
Eduardo, you say you're familiar with this industry. Where does
Yes.
this familiarity come from?
So it's my personal interest. Before I became a CIS major, I wanted to be an airline pilot, and it's still my backup plan, to be honest. So I look a lot into aircraft crashes. I don't know, it kind of just fascinates me in a strange way. So I heard about the 737. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute, but
Okay.
I heard a lot about it before this.
Okay.
All right, so now here's for some of the other industries. So Boeing is also involved with space and military. Both of these are government areas, so it's completely different drivers of demand. So their main income from these areas is just government contracts. So that can be through the United States military or through NASA, which is also a government funded organization. The United States, like Cornel had mentioned earlier, they've worked with Boeing all the way since World War I. So they have a very, very, very long history together, and that they've been good partners for well over 100 years now. And NASA, that's more of a recent thing. On the right, you can see an image of one of the things that one of the Starliners that Boeing is starting to look into. And I kind of found it interesting that Boeing's starting to work with NASA, especially because this spacecraft here is intended to be reusable. And it's kind of interesting to me just because SpaceX has recently just been smacking NASA in a sense, they've been kind of humiliating NASA. And so I can see that NASA's trying now to catch back up with SpaceX in that area.
That's interesting. This is a hell of a photograph. That I don't know where you got it, but that's a fantastic photo.
Thank you. I spent a lot of time designing these. So now we're going to cover some of the economic trends of Boeing's principal nations, where they get most of their business from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, please. Okay, so here's a depiction of Boeing's global revenue in 2020. So you can see that by a wide margin, the United States is their biggest customer. But take this with a grain of salt, because the United States looks like their main customer, especially because of the government contracts. So keep a good eye on that, because if you would take out the government contracts and focus solely on, say, just the selling of aircraft, then this would be way more international than just domestic. This graph is very unbalanced just because of the government contracts. So keep that in mind. But yeah, first it's United States, then Europe, then the Middle East, airlines like Qatar Airs and Iran Air, companies like that. And Asian companies, excluding China, which was interesting to me. I didn't know they had such a big presence in Southeast Asia. They had Korean Airlines, All Nippon Airways and Japan Airways. Like they had a lot of connections over there, which I didn't know about. I thought that was pretty interesting.
That's a good point. Now, why do we have this slide in the environmental section? In fact, there's a good reason. I want to be sure you know.
Well, this is the environment that they're in, as in like this kind of shows you the competitors
Okay,
kind of.
okay. The reason we do this is because the importance of these countries or regions tells us the importance of the economic information which we're about to look at. So, you know, it's rather a surprise that aside from the European economic outlook, we'll be interested in Middle East and Asia also. So I hope you're going to show us some economic information on those regions as well as the US. Okay.
So here to begin with, we're going to look at the primary nations exchange rates. So exchange rates are important when conducting international business because obviously they're not going to have the same form of currency as the United States. So like in the first chart, you can see that the Chinese yuan, I believe it's pronounced, when compared to the US, like let's say in like 2010, you would need about 7 yuan to purchase $1 US. So obviously the prices of the aircraft and things that they're selling to these nations are going to be incredibly different. And you can see that they do tend to vary kind of wildly. Like they're reasonably like stable, but there's obviously going to be differences. So when conducting business overseas, it's important to keep an eye on these so you know what currency, what to expect out of the sale.
Yeah, so if the dollar used to buy 7 yuan and now it buys 6.5 yuan, you can flip that also. 6.5 yuan buy a dollar, whereas it used to take 7 yuan to buy a dollar. So what does that say? The Chinese are able to buy US aircraft more affordably because of the exchange rate, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, and that's sometimes that can get to be very important. That's quite a price reduction.
Yeah. And here you can see some other nations. So you have Japan, the Japanese yen, and the UK pound sterling. So another thing is like whenever looking at exchange rates, there's going to be countries that you're just not going to accept their currency because their currency is too volatile, it's too inflated. Like you wouldn't be conducting business with like Venezuelan dollars, I guess I could say that as an example, because it's just too inflated. It's not a good idea to do with business. So it's important that you look at the rates and make sure that they're reasonably stable for purchases.
Good point.
All right, so here's the interest rates. I believe that more so than maybe any of the other companies, this is important because when airliners purchase aircraft from Boeing, a lot of the times they're just not going to give you cash for it. Like it's ridiculously expensive planes. You're just not going to pay it up front. So looking at nations' interest rates is really important because you're going to expect companies to take out large amounts of debt to purchase aircraft from Boeing. So looking at these, you can see that for the most part, like they have their high ends and their low ends, but they're relatively stable. It all has to do with how like the world economy essentially is doing. Like you'll notice a very noticeable dip in like 2008 and 2019.
As a general rule, lately, in recent years, interest rates have come down, sometimes dramatically, like in the UK. But interest rates have made it easier for airlines to purchase airplanes because when they borrow money to buy those airplanes with, the interest expenses aren't as high, according to these graphs.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to look at the GDP per capita for some of the main nations.
Eduardo, I'm sorry to interrupt you again.
Yeah.
You've left something very important out. You haven't given us GDP, the GDP for these countries. I've looked through your slides and it's just not here.
I must have left it out. I definitely did search it up. It's on the same website as where I got this
Search it.
information.
You're supposed to create it.
Yeah, I must
Did
have
you
missed that.
use the International Monetary Fund
Yes, sir.
database?
That's where I got this information. I must have just mixed it
Okay,
up.
well, is this GDP or GDP purchasing power parity?
Purchasing power parity, I believe, or I
Well,
believe this one's actually
you've got to be sure.
this was compared to the
All
US
we
dollar.
want, all we want is purchasing power parity.
Right, yeah.
And you really need to insert a graph for GDP, PPP. It's right there. It's easy to see in the International Monetary Fund. So
Yeah, it's not a problem. I was on the website, like you can like select which ones you wanted to use. I must
That's
have
right.
missed it.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yes,
And
sir.
the same for GDP per capita must be purchasing power parity. I'm looking at these graphs and I see United States way below Ireland. It makes me wonder. I think you should check and make sure you've got purchasing power parity here.
Okay, I can do that, no problem.
Okay, I think the best thing to do is move past this slide because we're a little unsure. The one thing that we can say for sure is that China's GDP per capita, that is the consumption potential of individuals, is a lot lower than the mature countries, including a lot lower than the United States. The reason I questioned this chart is almost always we see the blue line, the US GDP per capita at the highest, but you've got Ireland at the highest. And
Yeah, I found that
that's,
interesting too.
that makes me think that this is not purchasing power parity.
Yeah,
Okay. But the one thing we can get is, and again, we can't go back to the chart that shows GDP of these countries because you didn't prepare it. But if we looked at it, we would see that China is the largest economy in the world. And I think we saw that in some other presentations, but the China line goes breaking through Europe and the United States, and it's now the largest economy in the world by a long shot, and the gap is getting wider. So, but that's partly because it's got 1,400,000,000 people. When you take a look at the United States with only 330 million people, and we divide the GDP by that 330, we get the highest GDP per capita in the world. So, and that's the comparison. When we look at China, we see it's quite low. So if we're going to price products for China, we've got to think about what people can afford in the way of air travel. And that gets us back to what you were saying earlier. We need to try to make some of these aircraft less costly. In any event, you need to fix these slides.
yeah, that's okay. So here brings up another interesting point, like you were just mentioning, the primary nations populations. Like China is just in another league. Like their population has reached like 1.5 billion just about. So they're just this huge market that I believe that Boeing should really try to invest in. But it's got like really high barriers of entry because Comac, Chinese owned aircraft manufacturers are making it really difficult to enter the Chinese market because they don't want foreigners in there. They just want to get their market share like as large as possible. So it's been really difficult. And interesting enough, I made sure to include Ireland because Ireland is where Ryanair is based out of. It's an airliner in Ireland. I believe it's based out of Dublin. And they're the airline that has stayed with Boeing the most, even through, as I'll talk about in a moment, the 737 MAX incidents. They've requested the most Boeings, like they have the second highest ordered. So I found it interesting that Ireland has only a population of 5 million last time I checked, and they're still, one of the highest purchasers of Boeing aircraft, which was fascinating to me. So that kind of shows population isn't everything, but it is obviously a very important part.
Yeah, of course, Ryanair provides lots of service in Europe, especially to the rest of the United Kingdom, England, Wales, Scotland, and so forth.
Yeah, yes, sir. So here we can look at the inflation rate for these countries. And again, what we're talking about inflation rate, it kind of has to do with like the devaluation of money. So it kind of goes hand in hand with like exchange rates and things like that.
Right.
So it's important to look at this along with exchange rates. You know, again, you're not gonna you're not gonna accept currency from a country like Venezuela that has like insanely high inflation and things like that because it's just not financially sound. The currency isn't reliable enough to accept as a form of income. Next slide, please. And now here we're going to look at unemployment rates, and you can see the obvious dips and like the rises, you know, based off of the 2008 housing crisis and the 2019 the COVID epidemic. And this is important because if you're unemployed, you're really not going to be flying much. You don't have the income for it. You don't have a reason to fly, things like that. So it's another thing to factor in. So when you're looking at what markets that a company may want to like invest in, unemployment is a good idea to, it's a good idea to take a look at on the unemployment.
Yeah, if unemployment's high, demand for aircraft is low.
Yeah,
Right? Boeing's customers didn't need any new aircraft during the pandemic.
yeah, exactly.
Oops, did I go too far? Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna take away some of the major takeaways from this. The average GDP and GDP per capita, I'm sorry, I left out the GDP, but it's rising for most of these nations, which is an excellent sign for Boeing. That means that more of these nations are gonna be able to afford their aircraft, and more of the nation's citizens are gonna be able to afford to fly on their aircraft. Even though they're not making income from those flights, that'll encourage airliners to purchase more planes from Boeing and continue to make money out that way. The population also is continuing to rise greatly, especially in China. Despite the one-child rule, their population is still rising. Well, you know, it's over now, but it's still rising at a greatly. Lower unemployment rates, obviously, and favorable interest make for positive outlooks because companies are going to be able to purchase more planes on loans. And if unemployment rates are low, that means that the economy is doing well and more people are going to be taking flights. There's a large gap in the populations, as we mentioned earlier, between China and other nations, but that doesn't mean everything. Like I said, Ireland is one of Boeing's biggest customers, so population isn't everything. But again, it's still important for Boeing to try their best to make it into the Chinese market.
If it
Next slide,
makes you
please.
feel any better, I've traveled through China and I traveled on Boeing aircraft, also Airbus aircraft, but Boeing and Airbus both are very prominent in China. China's aircraft manufacturer, Comac, is making a large number of, I don't know what you'd call them, small or medium-sized aircraft, comparable to the Boeing 737, perhaps.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about longer range aircraft, Boeing and Airbus are there. I think I'm pretty confident that Boeing now has an aircraft assembly plant in China, and I'm pretty sure Airbus does too. But nevertheless, you're right. As Comac gets bigger and stronger, the challenge to Boeing and Airbus will be greater. The barriers to entry will be stronger because Comac would rather have that business than let Boeing have it.
Right. And I
So-
talk about that in depth in a moment. Yeah.
Okay, that problem's going to grow. Okay,
So now we're going to look at Boeing's major competitors.
okay.
All right, so here are the 5 most like major competitors that they have that are in their area specifically, and not just like aircraft parts or like, you know, they produce aircraft and military defense, things like that. So number 1 is Airbus, which, as you all know, is a European-based company. Then I had never heard of this company before, Bombardier, which is a Canadian company, interestingly enough, and they're making.
Bombardier.
Oh, it's French, Bombardier.
Oh, it's very French. It's in French Canada, and I've been in their factories.
Yeah, and I had actually never heard of them up until this point.
Bombardier,
Bombardier. Okay, excuse my pronunciation
no
then.
problem.
Then we have Comac, as we all know, the Chinese competitor. And then we have Embraer. Embraer.
Embraer.
Embraer, which is a
Embraer,
which is
right,
a Brazilian
right,
company. Again, one I wasn't that familiar with, and of course, Russian-owned UAC.
right. Fair,
So
that's quite, that's it. That's the industry. And there are a variety of stories about Embraer and Bombardier, but they've both done deals to either sell parts of their company or merge or do deals with Boeing and Airbus because times are so tough. You may get into that.
yeah,
Okay.
so here goes Boeing's market share when compared to its competitors. As of right now, it's neck and neck with Airbus, even though Airbus is slightly edging it out, as at least for right now. But what was interesting to me is Comac is the third largest on this pie chart. And I didn't know it was that advanced already. It's a little hard to be specific on Comac because it's like a Chinese owned, so they don't really release a lot of their information. But it was interesting to see that. Then Bombardier, I'll figure it out, is the next, followed by Embraer and UAC, the Brazilian and Russian companies. They have smaller shares, but they're still important players in the industry.
You've put your label correct when you said Irkut. And UAC, there have been a number of mergers of Russian aircraft companies. You've got up at the top 2011 to 2030.
Yeah.
What are we talking about there?
Yeah, so basically what I incorporated was their market share from 2011 to 2021 today. And it includes that, so that's the current market share, and then it predicts like 10 years in the future how it's kind of based off of. But I leaned it more towards like currently, but this is how it's like projected to grow.
What you might do, I see you say source estimates.
Yeah, so I just kind of took into account multiple estimates.
Mhm. If you can identify one or two of those estimates or the sources, that would make this a better exhibit because that 2011 to 2030 just attracts questions. You may even, well, that if you can just indicate your source, that'd help.
Okay. So then we have some of their competitors' revenues. Now take this with a huge grain of salt. I'll just tell you that right now, because it's really difficult to find revenue sources for Comac and UAC because they're basically government owned, and you're not going to see them just release information like that. Like they're not like publicly traded. They don't have to release financial statements like that. So it's really hard to find that. The ones that are, really simple to see is Airbus, Boeing, Bombardier, and Embraer. You can see that by far Airbus and Boeing, like they're the industry leaders, but Bombardier and Embraer still have large portions of the market share as far as revenues go. But I wanted to also mention, when a firm is owned by its government, revenue just doesn't matter, because as long as the firm is achieving the government's goals, the company's a success. So it doesn't really matter how much money they're making, as long as they have large shares of the market, their governments are happy.
You made a very good point. Whereas Airbus and Boeing have to be concerned about profitability, Comac and UAC don't have to be.
So now we're going to look at some of the demographic trends. Now, these are going to be extremely unique just because of the industry that Boeing are in. So I kind of went like off the beaten path for these because they're unique. They're not going to be like other companies that might be doing this presentation on as well.
Okay.
So to begin with, we look at some of the demographics for the usual passengers. So here's the frequency of flying solely for private reasons, no like business related things, by age. So you can see that it's reasonably like the same, like it's not wild, it doesn't vary too wildly, but you can see that the general age that people like to fly is from like 18 to 69. Just about, that's like the main time where they like to fly, because before that they're younger and they're just being carried around with their family, and after that they're just older, so they don't like to be out as much. And so that's kind of the information you can get from this graph.
There's another somewhat interesting item, and that's the yellow bar. And that must be more than 10 flights.
Um, I believe that's 0 flights, if I'm
Or is
not
it
mistaken.
0? Okay.
It's 0 flights, yeah. Because so if you notice the bottom, the red, that's 5 to 10, and the green represents anything over that. All of the
Oh, I
yellow
see.
represents, yeah,
Okay,
all of the yellow represents people who just
I
don't fly
got
at
you.
all.
Okay.
Mhm.
Well, during my career, I was in the green bar.
Yeah.
I lived on airplanes. Not that I wanted to, but I had to.
All right, so as a result of that, I wanted to include the ages of the Boeing's primary nations. So the populations, I included the age range from 15 to 64, which is the age range that flies the most. And as you can see, which was kind of interesting to me, China is, obviously they're the highest population, and they have the highest percentage of people between this age range, which was kind of fascinating to me. You're noticing a very noticeable dip there. Obviously, because of COVID, there have been a lot of deaths, which is unfortunate. But China actually, as according to the previous chart, they have like the most like eligible passengers for these aircraft. So not only do they have the biggest aircraft, but they have like the biggest percentage of people that will fly, which I found kind of fascinating. I'm like, that makes the market even more attractive, as opposed to someone like Japan, who has extremely low percentages of people in this age range. And they're having a lot of issues with their population aging too much, and there not being enough like younger people to take care of them. That's been a big issue over there. I remember reading a lot about that. But yeah, it's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, Japan has a big problem that way. And the good news in China is that although the proportion of people in this category, 15 to 64 years, is coming down a bit because of the population of the birth rates in the past, you can see that if you look down at the left side, it didn't grow very much. Then it grows real rapidly and then flattens out. And what you're really looking at is the effect of the one-child policy, which ended about 5 years ago. And now China's population is actually expected to flatten out for the next couple of years and then decline a little bit from about 1.4 billion to maybe eventually 1.25 billion. What makes that interesting is India's population, because it never had a one-child policy. And so its population will exceed China's. What makes this category grow is the growth of the senior citizens due to healthcare. And but in Japan, what has the group declining is frankly the people in that age group are sort of dying out, and birth rates in Japan are not growing at all. Japan's population is declining quite sharply, and it's a serious problem for Japan's economy.
Yeah. Okay, so here we have the GDP per capita versus the per capita for annual flight. So actually, whenever I was looking for the revenue for Comac, I stumbled upon one of their investor presentations, one of their official ones, and I found it kind of fascinating that they included this graph here. So it shows the direct correlation between GDP per capita and the per capita annual flights, meaning the more money people are making, the more flights they're taking, and it is very much directly correlated. So Comac obviously took advantage of this and put this in one of their presentations to their investors, showing like, hey, our GDP is rising, so is our annual flight rate. They also included like another graph that showed that airlines like flying through aircraft is becoming their most popular form of transportation. Like it's beating out trains, it's beating out cars, and I just kind of found that fascinating as well.
Boy, I wish you'd have posted that one too. This is a great exhibit.
Yeah. Here and then here, like I said, demographics are going to be a little bit different since their industry has a lot to do with military contracts and space contracts. I wanted to make sure I included this chart right here, which is military spending on their budget. So military spending has been increasing steadily ever since the 60s, I would say. I believe this is when this is. And even though you can see at the bottom, the percentage of GDP is less and less each year, that doesn't matter. The spending is increasing billions every year. You know, it's been a consistently like upward trend since the 60s. So Boeing has nothing to worry about. The government is going to continue to spend on these contracts. Like this isn't something they should really be too concerned about. And then here we have NASA's budget. I wanted to make sure to include NASA's budget because they have a lot of contracts with NASA now, so they've diversified a little bit. And as you can see, there was massive, massive spending on NASA in the 60s whenever we were in the Soviet space race. Obviously, that's gone a lot further down now, and it's kind of stabilized around like the 20 to $30 billion range. But they still have like a pretty consistent budget. So again, Boeing does not have too terribly much to concern themselves with in this area. So now we're going to look into the strategic issues.
Pardon me, let me take a quick note here. Eduardo, you're really covering some ground here.
Yeah, I got a big part of the presentation because I know I understand. I feel like I understood this part of it the
You're
best.
you're doing a good job.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So problems with Boeing. Boeing's had a lot of problems recently. Of course, the biggest and main one, Boeing has suffered greatly from COVID. The safety restrictions on flights have led to reduced purchasing of aircraft because there were no flights essentially for like a year and a half. So that caused a lot of problems. And now that there are flights, less and less people are going on them due to safety reasons and the mask mandate. People just don't want to fly if they're forced to wear a mask. So that's caused a lot of issues for airlines. So the demand for aircraft just isn't there like it used to be. Some companies are, they're defying the mold. Like I said, Ryanair and Southwest Airlines, they have put in huge purchases for 737 Maxes. To my surprise, I would have assumed they would have waited out, but I suppose there is enough of a demand for them to do this. Then the big issue, the 737 Max crashes have cost the company dearly. So the 737 Max was an aircraft that was designed to compete with, I believe it was an Airbus, a newer Airbus aircraft. But Boeing didn't want to undertake a huge research and development process that would have been extremely costly. They wanted something now, something new. And at the time, they had developed new, larger engines. So they decided to just mount these new, larger, faster, more fuel-efficient engines onto their previous 737 models and call it 737 Max. The problem with this is they didn't really fit on the aircraft. So they had to raise the wings a little bit and move it forward, which seems fine, but it completely shifts the center of mass on a flight. So the flying it for pilots became extremely difficult because they're not used to it. And in order to avoid the training for this, Boeing, without telling anybody, which was incredibly negligent, decided to put in a system that would auto adjust for this new center of weight. So because of this, there was a lot of there was 2 crashes due to their behavior that was directly caused from Boeing not disclosing this new system. In the middle of flights, the system glitched out and would just make the plane nosedive. It just kept putting nose down, nose down, nose down. And no matter how much the pilots fought it, they didn't know the system existed, so they couldn't shut it off. And it caused 2 crashes. Because of this, the Air Maxes were grounded and cost Boeing billions of dollars and forever tarnished their name. Because they used to be known for having relatively safe aircraft, but this like negligent behavior, it's just very off-putting and it's kind of disgusting, to be honest. They put people's lives at risk for something that they could have saved if they just released this information. So another major issue for them is Boeing is facing intense competition from rival companies, and many of them are receiving major government aid, some directly because they're owned from the governments, and others through government subsidies like Airbus. You could say Boeing also receives government subsidies in a way through all of their government contracts, but I wouldn't go that far, but definitely they are involved with the government. So that's something you should keep in mind.
Yeah, I think I've seen assessments, and when it's all said and done, Boeing, for instance, gets contracts from the government to do research and development, which results in improved designs for commercial aircraft. So, but it's in the military budget. I think both of these companies get a lot of support from their governments for good reasons. Each of these two companies, Boeing and Airbus, provide a foundation, strengthen the economy of their regions, the US and North America and Airbus in Europe. But the governments in Europe want Airbus to succeed and they're going to help. And same way with the US. So no surprise there. And of course, the same thing we've already acknowledged is going on in China and Russia, only there it's so obvious we point right at it and say government subsidies, but we don't call what happens in Europe and the United States government subsidies, and you know damn well that's exactly what they are. So
Right.
every country, every major country wants to support its aircraft industry, and that's for very obvious reasons.
All right, so for the solutions to some of these issues, I believe that Boeing needs to heavily pursue developing nations and their markets. I would throw China into this. You can call them developing nation if you want. I wouldn't, but regardless, that's a market that really needs to be taken advantage of. You need to go in there. You need to kind of fight with the Chinese government in a sense, because they're not going to let you take it easily. So Boeing really needs to invest in going in there. And not only them, but other developing markets as well, obviously, like Africa, huge market. Again, China is heavily involved in these. COMAC is everywhere, all over these. So Boeing needs to compete with that. They can't just sit idly by while they take it. Next, I need Boeing to stay innovative. So in my opinion, the 737 MAX disaster, it's Boeing being complacent. They didn't want to invest in a new research and development project that would cost a lot of money or whatever, develop a new aircraft. It just shows complacency to me. They feel like they don't need to do that extra effort, and they're starting to develop the 777s, which are, that's a step in the right direction, but I feel like they need to continue to do this. And lastly, the Boeing needs to continue to work with the US government. They've been doing it since World War I, and they need to continue to do this. In fact, if they can find a way to increase the amount they work with businesses, then it's going to be really important that they do that. They work with the government as much as possible to compete with these government-owned firms from foreign nations.
Yeah, if you do end up touching up these slides, you might mention not just the U.S. government, but as you just mentioned, working with other governments to gain acceptance, for instance, in China, as well as developing nations.
Yeah, kind of using that like global strategy to work with foreign governments, or foreign nations, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly.
Eduardo, are you going to finish now?
Nah, I'm all done. I'm passing it on now.
The reason I asked is I want to compliment you.
Thank you, sir.
You've done a really great job of covering your material. Definitely fix those economic charts.
Yeah, it just slipped my mind.
Yeah,
It's just
just fix them up.
all right,
Okay,
thank you, sir.
who's up? Who's up?
Cole Johnson is up.
Okay, Cole Johnson. What are we going to talk about?
I'll be talking about Boeing's business functions.
Business functions, okay.
Yes. As you can see, here is the multinational organization structure and the allocation of responsibilities. As you can see, our Boeing's president and CEO is David L. Calhoun. Then he's the president, chief, executive officer. As you can see, the executive council and their responsibilities.
You see, I fixed your slide up for you.
Oh yes, appreciate that. Thank
This
you.
isn't the way you prepared the slide, is it?
Oh no, sir.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
All right. Anything in particular about the officers that you want to share with us?
I can go through the list of what everybody does.
Okay.
Yeah. Throughout the executive council, each officer focused on different nations and areas. B. Mark Allen, he's the Chief Strategy Officer and Senior Vice President, focused on the strategy and the corporate development. William A. Amp Pofel II, he's the Vice President of and focused on the supply chain, Boeing's global services.
You don't have to read the slide to us,
Okay.
but I think what's significant is that each one of the business units, Boeing International, Boeing Defense and Space and Security, and Boeing Global Services is set up like a separate company. So this is a multinational organization, and each one of these business units is set up like a separate company with a president, right? And then they are served by corporate support functions such as the supply chain folks. So there's a vice president of supply chain, and his job or his unit is to support the purchasing and acquisition of materials that these divisions need to build their airplanes and so forth. Another is global compliance, but since we've got the interaction of corporate staff with individual business units, there's a suggestion that we may have a matrix organization, but what we see for sure is at least the independent business unit. So it's at least a multinational organization. Do you remember the part of the course where we had the different organizations? Was that chapter 16? You've looked at it very, very recently, but in any event, you can go back to your textbook and find out what kind of an organization structure Boeing has based on what Cole has given us here. I hope Cole will summarize that for us. Okay, Cole, sorry to interrupt you, but that was pretty important.
Oh, yes. Oh, wait, can you go back, please, to the so I can talk more about the structure?
You want to go back here?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I want to talk about Boeing's structure. It's a matrix organization structure. It is a workplace format in which employees report to two or more managers rather than one manager overseeing every aspect of a project. Because it's a
I hear him whispering to you. Why don't you just let the person talking to you speak in the microphone and tell us? Who's talking? Just give it to him.
Well, sir, I just wanted to remind him that the reason that it's matrix is because it's like separate countries, so they have to like mix together. That's just what I wanted. I just wanted him to mention that. Like it's matrix is the best option because they're so divided, like different sections. It's important they connect to each other.
Yeah, that's a good point. So
Yeah, I just wanted him to mention that.
in addition to the product divisions that we see at the bottom of this chart, we also have geographic divisions where officers are responsible for operations in different regions or countries. So you've got a lot of interaction here. So if you go back to that chapter and look for the matrix organization chart, you'll see this table where the functions go crosswise and they have to interact, which is good for teamwork, but it makes things complicated because they have to coordinate. Okay. Thank you, Eduardo.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, are we off to the next slide?
Yeah, next slide, please. I'm gonna talk about Boeing's methods of multinational operations. This first method is the operating methods. Boeing's three methods are strategics, tactical, and operations.
Those are methods?
Yeah, well, the type of methods that they use.
Are you
As far
going to
as-
tell us about these types of methods? I see your next one takes us to distribution. What are you going to
Yeah.
tell us about strategic methods or tactical methods or operating methods? Do you have anything on that?
No, sir. I mean, they were when I looked them, they were all pretty much the same. Just I mean, they're the same.
Like hell they are.
No, not the same type of methods,
No,
but they're the same.
okay, you're coming up short here, Cole. I'm not sure you really did a lot of work. What you need to do is disregard strategic and tactical. Okay, and you need to show us some slides about how Boeing does the assembly of aircraft, quality control. We've already talked about procurement of materials. That would be pretty important. I think frankly, a diagram, a matrix diagram just copied right from your textbook would be a good idea. I don't know whether you've already shown us a map where all of Boeing's factories are located, but you know, a map or perhaps a list of where these factories are located would be very important. And I do think that if you do that, you'll probably show us that there's a factory in China. But the operating method, you know, this topic has not been covered, Cole. You might, now here's a situation where if you would work with your team might have helped you. You might have gone to your teammates and said, hey, I don't know how to do operating methods. What does that involve? And let your teammates help you. Because clearly what you came up with doesn't have anything to do with operating methods. You haven't covered it. So see if you can. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, next slide. To
Yep.
distribution. Oh, yeah. So Boeing is one of the world's largest distributors of new aviation parts. It stocks over 1 million part numbers for original equipment manufacturers, maintenance, repairs, and operations airlines. So,
Okay, where are there distribution depots or distribution centers? We really need to know that.
you said where?
Yeah, they've got, you know, in order to get these parts to the airlines all around the world, they're going to have to, after they manufacture these parts, they're going to have to put them in locations on the map where they're convenient for the airlines and other customers around the world to get them, right? It's not like trying to think of who
Can I say where it is?
who the hell is the company that everybody buys stuff from online?
Can I say exactly where it is? Since
Yeah, I think what we need to do is there's probably a map that shows where these things are located.
yeah, and when I searched the match, it was wait, okay, can you go back, please? Well, it's located at the headquarters in Florida, Boeing's distribution
Well, there's
services.
several distribution centers for these parts, not just one location.
Okay.
Okay.
Here's the marketing and sales. I did here's Boeing's sales from 2020, well, 2005 through 2020. As you can see, the annual revenue. And then on the graph to the right, you can see you know, the graph of the sales of it's, you know, it's steadily increased over the years. Throughout the years, and then decrease. Okay. Yeah.
I hear that whisper again.
Here, you
Nobody's whispering.
you can-
Okay, what's your takeaway from this chart?
He's trying to be able to see the chart. We,
It- the-
we've
the-
got our faces in the way of
The
chart.
camera's in the way. He's trying to read it. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works. Okay.
What I can build from the chart, I mean, as you can see, the sales have increased from 2005 to 2018, then starts to decrease from 2019 to 2020.
Yeah.
And I could say that. I can
That's
say
because
that's
of COVID, right?
just about to say that. I can say that's because of COVID.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Boeing's technical functions. Boeing's The company's technical functions are commercial and military aircraft, satellites, weapons, electronic and defense systems, launch systems, event information and communication systems, and performance-based logistics and training.
Okay. Are you going to tell us anything more about these functions?
Functions of what?
Well,
It just goes more into the
the,
airplanes.
the engineering in an aircraft company is pretty darn important. So is the research and development. Again, I think you need to show us an organization chart that shows how big these units are, where they report. I think that, you know, the Boeing's aerospace engineering, its energy or fuel engineering, the development of fuel efficient engines. There's actually work on development of engines that are solar powered. They're not there yet, but that project is underway. But you've just got a whole lot of projects here and technical functions. Among other things, how many people do this work? That information is in Boeing's Form 10K. Have you looked in Boeing's 10K, Zach? Sorry, Cole, have you looked in Boeing's Form 10K?
Yes, sir. I looked at it.
You did?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't see anything about these functions there?
Oh, no, I did. I just thought I would just state them more. So, and what those functions are.
I don't think you looked very close. Okay. Administration.
Yes. Administrative services. Boeing's 3 business units are commercial airplanes, cover more so defense and space security, and their global services.
Are those administrative services?
Those those are when I came up when I
What do you, maybe administrative services include things like HR and insurance. And the financial and accounting people, not the financial trends that's coming next, but the people who do this work, the compliance people, and so forth. These are not administrative functions on this slide. Okay, you don't have any administrative functions here. What we're looking for are the people who support the operating units with administrative services. So this slide didn't make it. You need to see if you can fix this. If you
Yes, sir.
do, let me know. But right now, your grade isn't going to be real good for these slides because there's just so much missing. Okay,
Yes, sir. And here's the financial trends.
and who's going to be talking about that?
Me, I did the financial trends. Here's the Boeing's company trend analysis to 2011 to 2019. As you can see, the leverage ratio at the bottom. The leverage ratio basically assesses the company's ability to meet its financial obligations, like debt. As you can see, the revenue, the operation margin, net profit, return on total capital, and
Okay,
long-term debt for each year.
what are your conclusions from this slide?
What are my conclusions?
Did you prepare this slide?
I did. Yes, I prepared the graph. Yeah, I prepared the chart too.
Okay, well, having prepared this slide, you must have looked at it. What do you think the takeaways are?
The takeaway from this,
What jumped out at you?
what jumped out at me, for me, it was just the revenue. What jumped out at me, again, what
Just
we
the
saw.
revenue.
I mean, not just, I mean, looking at,
What's happened to return on total capital, return on investment?
I mean, what Johnny Moore was.
Fell to zero, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. Zero.
What about net profit?
Net
It's a
profit. And then
loss.
yeah.
And What has happened to shareholders' equity? Does Boeing have shareholders' equity in 2019?
No, it decreased.
Okay, it's been wiped out.
Yes.
And therefore, when we take long-term debt as a portion of the sum of long-term debt and shareholders' equity, since shareholders' equity is negative, long-term debt is greater than the total. Okay, and with a leverage ratio this high, that's life-threatening. Okay, so when we get to goals, I hope you guys are going to talk about the level of risk. Boeing's leverage is high risk, right? It has no equity, and it's got almost $20 billion of debt, and yet it has no profit to repay that debt with, to generate cash to repay the debt with. This is life-threatening. Other than that, no problem. Now, this exhibit is supposed to come in the goals section. This one doesn't appear unless you're, well, if you can, I don't know what you've got coming at the end. Do you know
No, but
how
you
to
s-
get the differences here?
Yes, you had said for 2023, 2004 that we're not supposed to put that in there.
I can't understand you, Cole.
You said there was no data for 2023 and 2024.
Yeah, but how do we fill in the empty columns?
Dylan, you
Okay, so the difference between 86 and 100 is 14, right?
I mean yes.
So we
yes.
divide that by 3, and we're going to get a little less than 5 billion a year. So you can divide this by 3 and take the answer and add it to each year. Alternatively, you could just swag it, you know. How about 4,500, 4.5 billion? So this is 90 billion 500, and then another 5 would get you to 95 billion, and then this is 100. Okay, here we're going from 10 to 12.5%. How do you, let's see, that's 1.5% per year. So how about 10.5? Sorry, 1.5 per year, 2.5 per year. So this would be 10 3/4. This would be 11 3/4 and 12.5, or something like that. But you've got to just fill them in, and you can do that by taking the difference and dividing it by 3 and adding it to each year, or you can just do it by rough estimate. There's 5 points of difference between 13 and 18. 5 divided by 3 is almost 2. So 14.5, 16, and 18, or something like that. But then when you do a graph of these things, it'll look better. Now, somehow Boeing is expected to go from a deficit of $11 billion, which doesn't look like what we saw. Oh, I'm sorry, we got to start here. 18 billion to 14 to 11 to +5. So we're going to have to, the difference is 16 billion. We divide by 3. So I don't know, that's a little more than 5 billion. So this one would be maybe a 5 billion deficit. This would be 0, and this would be a +5, something like that. And then you could calculate the leverage ratio. Cole, you need to complete this exhibit. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's next?
Is our financial trends. Just a graph of over the years of same thing, just our revenue. I mean, it's just the same thing, just a graph. As you can see, yes, just a graph of everything.
Of everything.
Yes, of the financial trends
Okay,
from
yeah.
previous slide.
All right.
And for this, our profit trends from 2011 2015, Boeing's revenue increased from 68.73 billion to 96.114 billion. It decreased in years 2016 and 17. It increased in to 101.127 billion in 2018, then increased to 76.559 billion in 2019. From 2020 to 2022, Boeing's revenue increased from 58.158 billion to 86 billion. And from 2011 to 2018, Boeing's net profit, which is the earnings after expense, increased from 3.614 billion to 10.46 billion. In 2019, Boeing's net profit would fall to a negative 636 million. And from 2020 to 2022, Boeing's net profit would increase from a negative 11.873 billion to a positive 4.47 billion.
Okay. It would, if what? Would suggest that there's an if, right? You say would.
Yes,
It would, if what?
No, if it is. So no, it.
Okay, so we'll just say as expected. And that expectation is frankly from Value Line, right? You got it from those pages I sent you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You got some repair work to do here. Let's see. Who's working on strategic issues?
That would be me, Zach Blackburn.
Who?
Me, Zach.
Zach. Okay, Zach.
All right, so the basic strategy model for Boeing is that Boeing uses a global strategy to reach its potential customers. Boeing manufactures, military equipment, aircraft, as we already have talked about, all over the world, and it uses as global markets to sell its products. And really, the main way it sells its products is through mutual beneficial partnerships with governments. They have them with the U.S. government and with several nations across the world with military equipment, security systems, and so forth.
Do you still have your textbook?
I do.
You might take a look at global strategy. And there are various bullet points that tell you the characteristics of global strategy. For instance, standardization. The process
Right.
is the same in all their manufacturing locations, right?
Right, and Boeing does have to have, more
Yeah.
especially now because of their recent safety issues. They're
Yeah,
going
that's
to
a
have
good
even
point.
more standardized.
That's a good point. I think this slide needs to be completed.
It does.
I don't think you provided us with much in the way of evidence here.
Well, there was an image that I don't know why it's not there, but there was an image I included there, but it's not there.
Mhm.
So I can go back and add
Take a
that
look
in.
at your textbook and see if you can give us some points as to what global models include and see whether they apply to Boeing.
Okay. So let me move this out of the way so I can read this. Okay, so it says barrier to entry, should say barriers to entry, or I'm sorry, barriers to growth for economic market trends. So obviously the big thing that's happening right now in the U.S. economy is, of course, rising inflation on jet fuel and manufacturing parts for the company, as well as increased or rather decreased purchasing power for the consumers to buy plane tickets and all that, and that's going to cause a major impact on the company and as far as its ability to sell more aircraft, because the demand for aircraft will be affected by inflation.
Okay.
And
Oops, sorry.
And one thing I found on Boeing's website is it is forecasting a need for 39,000 airplanes across the world, valued more than 5.9 trillion. But from what I've read due to the 737 crash, I don't know if that's really the case. And it's going to affect those numbers in the market.
Yeah, you might tell us what period of time these 39,000 airplanes are going to be sold in.
I believe it was over I believe it was over a 10-year period, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, why don't you be specific and just tell us, just go to the report and find out. And again, this is worldwide, right? This is the worldwide demand.
Right, yes, sir. Mhm.
Okay, you need to do a little editing here.
And then barriers to growth. One of the big things that are being imposed by governments, certain governments, you have to have either your vaccine, COVID vaccine, or a mask, and that's a big issue with governments around the world, and that's going to cause, for some people that don't like to wear a mask, that's going to cause a decreased demand for flying and a decreased demand for aircrafts in general. And it also increased manufacturing regulations, due to Boeing's failed aircraft. One thing I found on their website is China has not approved Boeing's 737 because of its crash, and 1/3 of the jets in Boeing's inventory is supposed to go to China. So obviously, it's very significant. 1/3 of their jets. I mean, that's a big loss for the
There
company.
is.
And if they can't get their regulations in check. And I found this little cartoon. I thought it was really funny, how Boeing does safety inspections.
Yeah,
And
that is funny.
yeah, just checking the tire pressure. So that's really the main thing just in recent news.
Okay.
And of course, there's going to be increased, SEC standards too. Barriers to growth, rivals initiatives. So obviously, COMAC, Airbus are competing for competitive advantages, and they're doing that by offshoring labor and buying land for production and developing countries in Africa. And really with COMAC is, of course, owned by the Chinese government. And with that, they have an unlimited bank account, unlimited pocket to pick from. It received $72 billion in state support in 2020, and that was mainly due to COVID, and countries subsidized by China along the Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically a big trade route across China that really reaches, well, from what I read, it's trying to reach the world, like the modern day Silk Trade Route is what it is.
Right. Okay.
It will produce COMAX aircraft over Boeing because it's government funded, and why wouldn't you want to produce cheaper aircraft?
Right.
So,
Your first bullet is a little hard for me to read. Let's see, COMAC and Airbus are competing for competitive advantage and offshoring labor and buying land for production in developing countries. So I guess
that's the way they're competing for the competitive advantages. They're offshoring all of their production, labor and facilities to cheaper places.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's done through
I
funding
gotcha. Okay.
through Chinese government.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
And
Okay.
next yep. Yep, it's still me. And we're going to talk about the Anzoff's matrix for let's see, for approach to growth and sales and earnings of the business.
Okay.
So really the main thing is Boeing needs to keep, and for market penetration, it just needs to stay in the market is the main thing. And doing that, Boeing will do that through strategic partnerships. I know I read recently and I believe it's on a slide further up, but it applies to this one as well. They redid a contract with the U.S. government. And that's just an example of keeping the products in the market. And they also need to continuously work on improving their existing products. This is of course important because of recent news with the crashes and that's the main way they'll stay in the market. Because if they don't improve their products, then rivals like Airbus and COMAC are just going to boot them out.
I think maybe if you added a bullet regarding government relations, and regulation, that might be a little help.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
And then, of course, product development, Boeing needs, of course, continue to create new and improved aircraft, satellites, military equipment. If there's no innovation, if there is, and there's a Bible scripture that talks about where there's no vision that people perish. So this company has to continue to have a vision for its products and continually, try to do better with its products. More so now, safety is the main thing. And manufacturing aircraft at a much cheaper cost is one of the only ways to beat China on COMAC, because as I said earlier, it's totally funded by the government, and as long as the Chinese government's still around, they're going to continue to dump money into it, and it's almost kind of unfair, the advantage that they have against Boeing because of that, and just the
yeah,
only way really around that is just to produce the plane as cheaply as possible, and
and build a better quality airplane.
yeah, right, better quality, and
that the airlines demand.
right, and with inflation, it's going to be very hard to do that. For market development, Boeing's aircraft and other products outside the U.S. So 70% of Boeing's total backlog is from outside the U.S. and it reaches customers in over 150 different countries, which I did not know that. I did not know they were that world renowned. And I think they have a really good place in the global market because they're in so many different countries. Boeing is continuing to create and maintain partnerships. This is the part I was talking about for product development. Boeing and the U.S. Air Force extend the C-17 sustainment partnership with the aircraft, and it's valued upwards of $23.8 billion. And that's just one example of them reaching out, maintain market relationships. And let me move my screen down here.
Seat callers.
Yeah. So Boeing must adapt in order to reach certain markets, because some cultures are very sensitive to certain colors or certain images or certain designs. Boeing must adapt, even the most minor product specifications to have a better chance of reaching different countries due to the cultural norms. So product diversification, I think Boeing does a very, very great job of diversifying itself, because it's not only just the largest aerospace manufacturer company in the world, but it's spread out across all different kinds of military equipment, satellites, private and fighter jets, and that's how it's horizontally diversified. And integrated forward by creating different types of aircraft.
Yeah, you said diversified forward. It's we're talking about forward and backward integration, right?
Right. Well, yeah, and as far as producing different types of aircraft, and integrated backwards by producing the specialty.
When we talk forward and backwards, we talk integration.
Okay. Backwards by producing specialty parts for its aircraft, and also access to many different suppliers around the world will also help Boeing create more diversified products in the future. Currently, they have over 12,000 suppliers, and 6,000 of them being small businesses. And I think that's really, really important, because them being small businesses, that they'll bring a whole lot of different ideas to the table for Boeing's future products.
Okay. So who's doing
It's still me.
incentives and actions?
Yep.
This is Zach still?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So one major incentive with the company has for the environment, it plans to help the entire airline industry decarbonize by the year 2050. And in doing that, it's invested more than $60 billion in this program over the last 10 years. This image here on the right is a it's a personal electric taxi airplane called, it launched originally as Cobra in 2017, but then it was established as Whisk in 2019, when Kitty Hawk Aviation Company and Boeing partnered to produce that aircraft. And I've looked at several of them, and there's, you talked about the solar powered airplanes more recently. There's, I think that you had electric planes. There, yeah, electric planes and other clean aircrafts. So, and another major incentive that they have to have now is safety. Taking more safety precautions, of course, due to the recent crash. And they're doing this through structural tests, making sure the plane meets certain structural requirements. And a test called a static test, or a maximum load capacity test, to see how much the plane can hold while flying, and see if the weight has any effect on the plane malfunctioning. And also fatigue tests, which is stuff like, wind, rain, hail, and tests conducted in laboratories, wind tunnels, and so forth.
Okay.
And this is the coordination of domestic international management. This is the CEO, Dave Calhoun. One really interesting thing about him is he brings a lot more excitement and is more engaged than the previous CEO. And I believe with his leadership, we're going to see a more cooperative relationships with regulators all over the world. He's very much a regulator pleaser. He wants to make sure he's doing his job right, and wants to make sure that aviation companies with regulators have a good relationship with each other. And also, the old CEO, the previous one, Dennis Muhlenberg, was fired because of crashes. And yeah, I think this is a really good step for both domestic and international, for the domestic international sides of Boeing. Of course, yeah, safety is top priority. And this is Cornito.
All right, this is Cornell speaking. I'm gonna just kind of get us to the end of this little roller coaster with here on the outlooks. The next slide, Professor. All right, so this is pretty much the international and domestic sales mix. That's the MRE that I pretty much showed earlier, and some interesting facts about Boeing. They actually operate in 65 different countries, and they're kind of trying to work more towards their international business, because that's pretty much where all their income comes from. So 8,500 of their 164,000 employees actually are migrating and working overseas. And I'm pretty sure you've heard a lot about the famous 737. And due to that plane, Boeing's GDP is currently dropping at a slow pace, but that's kind of due to several faulty commercial airplanes that they kind of just release and just don't look over. Next slide, please. All right, now to get on to the major challenges. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the famous 737 MAX that I'm gonna just kind of go over. This plane has actually killed 346 people due to the poor design. And I just kind of think, like my friend Eddie said, poorly designed plane. I've never flown before, but if I do, I definitely know not to fly Boeing, because it's kind of very hard, because one, after you've done that, it's kind of hard to gain consumer trust back. And how can people trust you when the first thing you put forth is your wallet? And so this company is actually in a huge amount of debt. They've racked up, I think, $2.5 billion, and that's just in fines alone due to this plane. And I think before it's all done, they're going to have to pay out of pocket, I think, about $20 billion. Next slide, please. All right, and so after that 737 MAX crash, they actually had another plane which was kind of out of the ordinary, and that was the 777, or some people may call it the 777. This plane actually had an engine explode while it was actually in the air, and it killed everyone on board, and it rained debris all over I think it was, let me just kind of cheat from my slide here. Over Denver. Okay, so it was a flight over Denver, and yeah, it was mid-flight, and it kind of just exploded. It caught fire. It wasn't due to anything in the air. It was just due to faulty engineering. But I think they knew, and they still kind of just put the plane in the air, which was kind of a bad business move on their hand, and kind of a really selfish move all in all.
Okay.
Next slide, please. All right, and another challenge they're having right now is due to COVID-19. It's kind of hard to stay 6 feet on a plane, and it may get hot due to a lot of bodies. So some people just don't want to fly at all due to the fact that some mask mandates, and you have some anti-maskers out here, and some people simply they just don't want the shot. And I know some airlines may require you to have the shot before you come on board. And due to COVID-19, the company has actually lost $12 billion. And actually, sadly, they've been forced to lay off several employees due to the fact that they just can't afford to keep them right now when they're in so much debt. Next slide, please. All right, and this is kind of what I already said, how it's been affected in the United States since the pandemic. Pretty much, it's just hurting the company, and they're predicted to lose over 1,500 jobs due to that. Next slide, please, Professor. All right, now we're going to go to the overseas. That man right there is Sir Michael Arthur, and he is a big purpose of why Boeing is thriving overseas. He actually donated $500,000 to support Indonesia's COVID relief efforts, and he also launched a $10 million emergency assistance package assistance package to support India, because I'm pretty sure, as we've learned in class, India is doing really poorly, and their economy is just through
That's
the
right.
roof with COVID-19. And so this man right here actually took $10 million donated to them to help them kind of just get back on their feet. But really, he's not looking at it as just a crisis. He's just kind of being, the positive guy about the group. He just thinks, it's just a matter of time before, everyone just kind of goes back to being, living their ordinary day life. Next slide, please.
Huh.
All right, to end things off, you kind of see these two old guys fighting. Boeing is not just having problems with manufacturing, they're actually having a lot of problems in the workplace. This company has several management, engineering, and production problems. Joey Smith, who is actually the director of aviation, he stated that there is a huge lack of transparency and communication between senior management and the rank and file personnel due to the right thing with safety first and putting safety first when it comes to passengers. So pretty much what he was saying there was that this company is just pretty much, like I already said, putting their wallet first, and it's kind of just not putting safety first, because pretty much I don't think they think, what if that was your family on that plane, you would want them to get there safely or to whatever destination they're coming and going to and from. And pretty much just to wrap up everything that's been said, I think the only reason that Boeing is kind of staying afloat is due to the fact they have like a huge income from the military, and that they're doing good in other areas of the company. And yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you liked it. Thank you.
That's it, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, it's good that we're done. It looks like we've got nobody else left in the class. Everybody else left. So I'll try to ask some questions on the test about the latter portions of your presentation. So the ones who don't look at the video will get slammed. Okay, you have some repairs to make, and I hope you will do that.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to grade you for what you've presented and what is in your PowerPoint. When you've made the changes, let me know, and we'll take out the old PowerPoint and put the new one in, and then I'll change your grade. But there are a couple of you that are going to be kind of disappointed in their grades because they really didn't do much for us. On the other hand, there were parts here where for instance, Abel's model wasn't very good when Zach gave it to us. but Zach has done some pretty good stuff here on the strategic issues and so forth. So I'll take a look at all of this stuff, but if you care to upgrade your file, I'll see what I can do. Okay?
Yeah,
All right.
definitely.
Yeah.
Have a good holiday. We'll
Thank
see
you.
next
Have a
time.
happy Thanksgiving.
Bye.
Yeah.